Welcome to the Oregon Secretary of State's training on apostilles and authentications, what you need to know. This video will provide a basic overview of apostilles and authentications, what they are, what is their purpose, who is allowed to attach them to documents, the process for obtaining an apostille or authentication, the types of documents that can and cannot be certified, and a bit of information about electronic apostilles. First, what is an apostille or authentication? It is a document that indicates that the Secretary of State certifies the validity of the signature, seal or stamp, and position of the official who has executed, issued, or certified a copy of a document. The apostille or authentication is intended to make it easier for countries to exchange documents with confidence that they are valid. There are two important things to understand about apostilles and authentications. First, they do not certify the contents of any document. They do not guarantee that the contents of the document are true or make the document itself legal. Second, apostilles are only for use on documents that are to be sent overseas, not on documents that are to be used within the U.S. or U.S. territories or possessions. Which countries receive apostilles or authentications? Countries that are members of the Hague Convention receive apostilles. Countries that are not members of the Hague Convention receive authentications. In Oregon, the Secretary of State uses the same certificate for both apostilles and authentications. It is referred to as an apostille or authentication, depending on the country to which it is being sent. We use a single certificate that meets requirements for both Hague and non-Hague countries. As we move through the next slides, keep in mind that in Oregon, the apostille and the authentication are the same universal certificate. What is the Hague Convention? It is an international treaty that was created in 1961 to simplify the international exchange of documents by providing trustworthy authentication. The United States signed the treaty in 1981. Only nations who are parties to the treaty recognize the apostille certification. The Hague Convention maintains a list of current members on its website. You can see the URL on this screen. Who can attach an apostille or authentication to a document? In the United States, there are multiple designated authorities who issue apostilles or authentications. They are called competent authorities. Who is authorized to authenticate a document depends on the origin of the document. For federal documents, the competent authority is the U.S. Department of State Authentications Office. In Oregon, the competent authority for state documents is the Secretary of State. While a notary may bring documents to the Secretary of State for certification as part of their service to their customers, notaries are not permitted to attach apostilles or authentications. What is the process for attaching an apostille or authentication? Step 1, the notary performs the notarization. Step 2, the customer brings the document and certificate to the Secretary of State for attaching the apostille or authentication. Step 3, Secretary of State staff review the document and certificate for errors and verify that the document can be authenticated. Step 4, Secretary of State staff review the notary commission name, stamp, and signature and ensure that the notary's signature on the certificate matches the signature on file with the Secretary of State. Step 5, Secretary of State staff attach the apostille or authentication to the document and return it to the customer. And Step 6, the customer or the apostille agent, if the customer is using one, submits the document and certificate to the appropriate international entity. A request for an apostille or authentication may be submitted to the Secretary of State either by mail or in person. When the customer submits the request by mail, they submit this request form along with the document and certificate, to the Secretary of State. If the customer presents the document in person, a Secretary of State staff member will gather the information on this form before processing the request. Whether the request is submitted in person or by mail, the cost for the certification is $10 per request. This is an example of a completed apostille. Please note there is language at the bottom of the certificate that clearly indicates that the certification is not for documents that are to be used within the United States, and that the certification applies only to the official's signature and, when it is notarized, the stamp and signature of the notary. The apostille or authentication does not certify the contents of the document itself. The Secretary of State can certify a range of documents for business or corporate use. These can include certified copies of business organization documents that are on file with the Secretary of State, articles of incorporation or organization, assumed name certificates, certificates of limited partnership, certificates of merger, registration of trademarks, and certifications of existence or fact that have been issued by the Corporation Division. The Secretary of State can also certify a range of other types of documents. These can include adoption papers, powers of attorney, deeds of assignment, distributorship agreements, references and job certifications, vehicle titles, and school records. Please note, school transcripts, report cards, or diplomas must be signed by a school official, and the official's signature must be notarized in order for these documents to be certified by the Secretary of State. There are certain types of documents that the Secretary of State cannot certify. These include photocopies of public documents like vital records or court records. These must be originals or certified copies. They also include documents that contain statements regarding allegiance to a government or jurisdiction, documents that relate to the relinquishment or renunciation of citizenship, sovereignty, in itinere status, or World Service Authority, or documents that make a claim of immunity for the signer from either the law of this state or from federal law. Notaries may not certify copies of vital documents such as birth and death records or court records such as marriage certificates or divorce decrees. If your customer wants an apostille for a vital record, they must first request a certified copy from the appropriate agency. Requests for apostilles and for replacement copies of records for life events that happened in a foreign country may be made online through the State Department. There's a URL for that process on the screen here. What if you, as a notary, are asked to notarize a document for an apostille, but you know that it cannot have an apostille attached? Remember, your responsibility as a notary is limited. Your job is to verify the identity, willingness, and capacity of the signer. It is not your responsibility to make sure that the document will be accepted by the intended organization or agency. So first, look at the certificate very carefully to make sure that you understand what the certificate is asking you to do. If the certificate is asking for you to do something that a notary can do in Oregon, you can perform the notarization, and it is up to the customer what they do with it. If you have a friendly relationship with the signer and you know that they are planning on requesting authentication, but you also know that the document is not one that can be authenticated, you can warn the customer that the document will not be accepted. Be cautious about this, however, as you do not want to be construed as giving legal advice. Regardless of what type of document you are dealing with, follow the guidelines for good notarizations. Never notarize by stamping and signing the bottom of a document. All notarizations must include a legitimate notarial certificate. We hear from notaries everywhere and from national professional notary organizations that electronic notarization is the wave of the future. Can apostilles and authentications be attached to an electronic notarization? In Oregon, this is not yet possible. However, competent authorities in a number of countries are developing and implementing electronic apostilles, so that may be possible in the next several years. In the meantime, it is possible for a notary to certify a printout of an electronic record using a certificate for use in special circumstances. This certificate is available on the Resources and Aids to Notarization page on the Secretary of State's website and at the back of the Notary Public Guide with the other sample notarial certificates. Here are some resources to help you learn more about apostilles and authentications, including electronic apostilles, and guidelines on apostilles and authentications in Oregon. If you have questions about apostilles and authentications, or anything else pertaining to notarizations, please contact us. We're here to help. Thanks for watching.